The debut studio album from Canadian speed metal band Exciter had a major influence on the burgeoning thrash metal scene of the time, even predating the releases of Metallica's Kill 'Em All and Slayer's Show No Mercy albums. And while their first three records are utterly untouchable, let's talk about my favorite Exciter album, Heavy Metal Maniac. So I actually discovered this album 10 months after the release of their third album, Long Live the Loud. I was already familiar with both that album and its predecessor, Violence and Force. But the funny thing is that before 1986, I swore that Violence and Force was the first Exciter album. Didn't even know about Heavy Metal Maniac until my pal Matt in Reno, Nevada played it for me, and I checked the year on the back to discover just how wrong I was. Which is kind of crazy, but it also reminds me how amazing it is to now have an internet so we can just look up bands and albums and find out cool stuff. I do know that Heavy Metal Maniac got some piss-poor distribution back then, so that might explain some of my lack of knowledge, but still, I should have known about it before I actually did. As for the music on the album, Heavy Metal Maniac was recorded in the former town of Elmer, now part of Gatineau, in Quebec, Canada, during August of 1982. Producer on the record was John Belrose, and the entire album was recorded in Belrose's basement. When Shrapnel Records owner Mike Varney heard the recording, he wanted to leave the raw and aggressive sound from that basement recording intact, so it never got re-recorded, and that's what you get on the record. And in case you're wondering, the release date for Heavy Metal Maniac was June 14th, 1983. Also, regarding the tour for this album, it was a bit of a short one, as many sources say the band spent much of that time writing and recording material for Violence and Force. Speaking of which, they did play some tracks on this tour that would later appear on that second album, including Pounding Metal, Scream in the Night, and Violence and Force. Available dates on the internet placed the band mainly in the New York, New Jersey area, as well as select dates in Quebec for a total of 6 shows. On a couple of the US dates, they played with Anthrax, and for a couple of dates in Canada, they played with Voivod. And if wondering about vinyl pressings of Heavy Metal Maniac, there was the original Shrapnel Records release in 1983, which is this one. Then Roadrunner Records picked it up and put it out in 1986. Then in 2008, vinyl reissues were handled by Megaforce Records in 3 variants: Black Red Splatter, Silver Black Splatter, and Red Black White Splatter. Megaforce then reissued it once again, both in 2021 and 2023. It's also worth mentioning that this is the 4th release from Shrapnel Records ever, following the first 2 US metal compilation albums and the self-titled debut record from Wild Dogs. And I believe of the 3 disc label colors for Shrapnel, such being green, black, and silver, this only came with green labels, which were only used on the first 6 Shrapnel releases. And of course, the record sides here are labeled Side Heavy for the A side, and Side Metal for the B side, and yes, lots of bands will do this decades after, but this is definitely an early appearance of this type of side naming. So, they're ahead of the game in more ways than one. Anyways, the cover art for Heavy Metal Maniac was done by Andy Brown, who was also responsible for the cover of Exciter's follow-up album, Violence and Force. According to former Exciter guitarist John Ricci, it was shot in the band's rehearsal room, and is Dan Beehler's arm cutting the protective cover of Ricci's Marshall speaker with a knife. Also, those aren't real tattoos on Beehler's arm, but were actually drawn onto the photo. Ricci also stated that Andy Brown was a friend of theirs, as well as one of their roadies, and was also the one who came up with the cover idea. However, the original photo was in color, and there was actually meat hanging out of the speaker, but someone not in the band decided to go black and white and then draw in the meat part in red, which the band was not happy with. But it's hard to deny that it's still a classic cover, whether intended or not. Anyways, that's it for details. Let's get to the track by track. Starting with side 1, track 1, we've got The Holocaust. So this track is really an instrumental intro to the next song, but also worth briefly discussing on its own, at least since it has its own name. Anyways, track opens with the sound of blowing wind for the first 25 seconds, what my pal Dave Ingram of Benediction might call a wintro. After that, we get a quick run of distorted chords, progressions, transferring to some spacey electric and acoustic combo, then into some slow and heavy groove, accented by howling guitars and ominous bass in the back. Then the track fades into the literal explosion of the next song. Total runtime on this one is a little over a minute and a half, so if you're not into these sorts of intros, it's not really long at all, and it leads to a really killer track. So it might help to remember that this was recorded in 1982, long before the slew of post-Black Sabbath bands would come and replicate this type of atmospheric intro for their albums. In its defense, it really does serve well as the calm before the storm, and so I definitely keep it. Moving on to track 2, we have Stand Up and Fight. Track opens with as I mentioned, an explosion, or maybe the combination of an explosion and a really loud gunshot. At any rate, this brings in 2 bars of the opening isolated riff, heavy and massively distorted with bass and drums kicking in, along with Dan yelling, "Fight!" Although far more competent, the drum tone and beat style reminds me of early Venom in some ways, and specifically from Welcome to Hell. Some of that might have to do with the production value, but not a complaint for me at all. Vocals are a combo of melodic snarls and yells with some higher pitch accents in there for good measure. Notably after the second verse, which is simply the title of the song briefly repeated. And if you listen carefully, Dan goofs the pronunciation of the word sadistic in that second verse. When I was a kid, it sounded like sextant, which is a nautical navigation device, so that didn't make any real sense, but was still pretty funny to me. Anyways, back to the chorus. And gotta say, I do love the simplicity and punch of that song's title delivery, spotlighted by the drop to just guitars behind it, and then it catapulted into this wild soloing and double bass madness. After that, we get another verse and pre-chorus, following a brief closing out riff underneath Dan's screaming out the title's track, accenting each word for effect. Then the track abruptly ends. So this is the album Exciter has pulled from the most for live sets. Also, the song Stand Up and Fight is their 5th most played song in concert from their entire catalog. Anyways, the lyrics here are very much in that rally the troops theme for the metal kids to, well, stand up and fight for their music and their way of life. Definitely fist-banging stuff here for both the lyrics and the music. Speaking of the former, my favorite lines are, "Attacked by the forces, blown to the ground, we're an army like soldiers, more than 1,000,000 strong." So easily one of my favorite songs on the record, and really love that it's so early on in the track listing. Where it belongs. Gotta have this one up front. Moving on to track 3, we've got Heavy Metal Maniac. So much like the previous track, this also opens with a distorted, isolated riff, with the drum and bass fill soon coming in to bring us to the verse passage. And I suppose it's more obvious in this track, but Dan's vocals have taken on a bit more reverb, and some flange on the guitars at times too, or maybe I should just say a lot of flange in this track. And I definitely didn't notice it as much when I was a kid hearing this album, but the Venom influence is really here on this track too. And more so than the meager Motorhead vibes throughout the album. Again, I think both are kind of the production thing going on. Anyways, chorus largely brings us to the title's track with mostly ringing chords to make room for those vocals a bit. Also loving when Dan drops in the line "stand back" in the chorus, just adds a little punch to the proceedings. Also some cool bass fills in that same chorus for those listening carefully. Really dig the short solo flourish bit between the second and third verses. It's a little unexpected, but also works. After the second solo, some descending chord riffing brings us to a quick drum fill, and then to the speedy and ripping solo. And here's where I'm reminded just how full of a sound this band actually has, especially with only 3 members. Somehow it's just not lacking in that department at all, even during solo time. Anyways, a little revisit of the first verse, then more flange guitar again, and then to the final chorus, a repeat of that descending chord segment mentioned before. Then Dan screams the song title, and the track stops there. Anyways, Heavy Metal Maniac, the song, is the 2nd most played track by the band in a live setting. And it's pretty close to number 1, to be honest. Definitely a very popular song for this band. As for the lyrics, they seem to involve a sexual encounter of sorts, but maybe also murders on the bill. Maybe. I guess with a title like Heavy Metal Maniac, you might expect lyrics more about metal, but no worries. Definitely have favorites, and those are "Gonna break the chains, gonna break away, heavy metal's thunder rising fast, gotta make you stay." So similar in tempo to the first track, which still keeps the record moving along without any stinting. It's also an established classic song from Exciter, so you're bound to hear it at one of their live shows. Moving on to track 4, we have Iron Dogs. Track opens with yet another isolated riff to open, this time more of a heavy, slow groove. Then a steady drum beat fades in and then breaks away to the main riff, bringing some seriously slow headbanging moments throughout. Chorus comes soon enough and it alternates between the song title and other brief lines, similar to a call and response. Really love when Dan hits this echoey, overtracked, and almost power metal wail at the end of the line, "Iron dogs eat the city." Fantastic and catchy chorus overall. Anyway, second verse comes in and we now get some cool solo bits in between each line. Then another chorus and then the solo proper. It's vaguely bluesy but mostly shrill and of course very metal. Then back into the main riff in the third verse with more of John's solo bits weaving in and out. Then to the chorus again, but now it shifts to a more manic and speedier riff passage, bringing something of a bridge moment. Really dig the staccato vocalizing along with the beats during this passage, though you could make the case that this entire deviation sounds like it's from a different song entirely, kind of like what Black Sabbath had done with some of their earlier tracks, and maybe that's the thinking here. At any rate, more soloing commences, followed by an ending riff with a live flourish of all instruments, while Dan sings the line, "Iron dogs eat the city," amazing line, but this time more for dramatic effect. Then the entire song just fades out, even if it sounds like it's going to end abruptly at the end of the fade anyways. Interesting choice there. As for its placement on their concert set lists, the song is the 6th most played song by Exciter, and it's pretty easy to hear why. Anyways, the lyrics are about metal fans, perhaps specifically about Exciter fans. I'd say it's similar to Manowar in that regard, but this track has such a pummeling rawness to it that any comparison ends with the lyrical sentiments, and definitely not the music itself. But as for favorite lyrics, they are vicious as dogs like a pack of black wolves, spilling blood. Get out of their way, they come from below and above. So while the pace is taken down a touch from the first 2 songs, it sacrifices nothing in terms of heaviness and crunch. Definitely a favorite of mine on this record. Moving on to track 5, we've got Mistress of Evil. Track opens with an isolated drum fill, quickly jumping into a steady but somber riff, along with an accenting bass line and a mid-pace beat. However, that all changes 30 seconds later as a ringing chord is broken by a more up-tempo passage with slamming beats, rolling bass lines, and a very catchy chord-heavy riff. Dan comes into this with a vocal verse that's his signature screams, snarls, and yells. Pre-chorus is particularly catchy, coming down in tone and definitely sounds like the more melodic but heavy end of, again, classic Venom. Each line is accented by short solo bits, much like in Iron Dogs. After the pre-chorus, we get an even lower tone drop for the chorus, with the song title repeated twice, along with the line, "She's coming to take you away," and then some unhinged soloing to take us to another chorus, and then the second verse, and the pre-chorus, but then it drops into a slow groove with Dan almost clean singing the bridge lines, which vaguely brings to mind the more ballady side of Paul Di'Anno's era of Iron Maiden. And we're probably going to hear more of Dan's softer side later on in the record. Anyways, this bridge section ends with Dan really throwing in some menacing snarl into the final line, "And she'll be back again to kill," so not so ballady, obviously. After a drum roll, we go back into the speedier end of things for the ending segment, with Dan's cool drum fills and then echoey screams, followed by a quick, almost live-sounding stop. As for lyrical content, it's definitely about a female killer, maybe a Countess Bathory type of gal. Lots of sacrifice virgins for the Dark One and all of that. My favorite lines are in the pre-chorus, and they are, "We touched the sky, we never lived to wonder why. She came from hell to burn the sky, she came from hell to see us die." So another jump in speed, comparatively speaking, and a good track, but not strictly a favorite. Sadly, it's only been played live a few times between 2018 and 2022, so they don't break this one out much. And when the first 2 albums were combined onto CD back in 1989, Mistress of Evil was dropped for time constraints, but maybe also considered the weakest of the lot as a result. In any case, I do like Mistress of Evil and would rather have it with the record than not. Flipping over to side 2 and track 6, we have Under Attack. Track opens with an isolated drum passage, similar to the intro of Motorhead's Overkill, as that's what immediately came to mind. This quickly transfers to an up-tempo segment that could easily fit on an early Saxon record. Definitely some of that here as well. But of course, the vocals change that considerably. At this point, Dan shifts to more of a talk singing for the verse and pre-chorus, This is probably a good time to mention how utterly satisfying the change-ups in this track are. There's a middle section in the first verse that is basically what will later be the pre-chorus. Then it jumps back into verse riff, so a nice switch out there. Then we have the actual pre-chorus with a dramatic stop, and then the chorus punches in with some sweet double bass drum work, while the song title is repeated 4 times, including a scream in between. Love the relentless rhythm of the chorus, almost reaching a gallop riff style, and overall very catchy. After a rapid drum fill, we're on to the second verse, pre-chorus, and chorus, then into the shreddy and whammy-filled solo. Then we revisit the lead-in isolated drum passage, then into the third verse, pre-chorus, and final chorus, ending with a series of dramatic chords, giving it a live-sounding finale, and then it immediately closes out. So the lyrics to this one are about another killer, this time a guy, though also not as many vocal lines here as with some of the other tracks on the album. Lyric credit is given to Clint Beeler, who is Dan's brother, and also the person who gave the band their actual name, which he obviously pulled from a Judas Priest song. Anyways, favorite lyrics on this one are, "You're dying to scream, but you can't get it out. He shows you his knife, and your life is in doubt." So a solid and catchy track, though a little light on the lyrics. Definitely dig this track quite a bit, and it's a strong way to kick off side 2 of the record. Moving on to track 7, we've got Rising of the Dead. So the track opens with an extended power chord, quickly transferring to that same chord struck faster and more frequently. Over top this are simultaneous drum strikes and single palm mutes, each allowing Dan time to sing a vocal line. Some variation in similar patterns continue throughout this first verse, then kicks in for a more mid to fast tempo passage for the next verse. And we'll go into favorite lyrics later, but the lyrics for this track as a whole are probably some of the best on the album. Very dramatic, occult-based, and of course, very bloody. It seems the only time that Dan and Alan co-write lyrics on this record is on this track, as they otherwise write separately. Seemingly, they work well together, if this track is any indicator. Anyways, love the catchy sing-along chorus with some snare variations for fills that are pretty fun. That reminds me that Dan is kind of an interesting drummer who just doesn't keep steady time. He also varies a lot on this record and does this while singing since he is also their vocalist. Pretty amazing. Anyways, after the chorus, we get another verse and chorus, then an interesting breakdown with wailing chords, but also some lead bass work, somewhat reminiscent of Steve Harris. But I'm also hearing it overall in the following bridge with some real overlap between this bridge and the bridge in, of all songs, 22 Acacia Avenue. I don't know, maybe give it a listen and see if you hear what I hear. It's not exact, but there is some similar note choices, gallop riffing, and structure that seems at least a little familiar, but with some classic Exciter aggression tossed in. Anyways, after that, a ripping and solo ensues with some very cool bass fills in the back. Then onto a second bridge with a solid dramatic riff, more drum strikes, and matching vocal accents on each word of the line, "Rise from the Dead." Then the track stops. And since you can already sense that I like this track, you should also know that this is currently the 7th most played song in Exciter's concert history. So, another top 10 track from this very album. Anyways, as the title suggests, the lyrics are about the undead rising from the grave and attacking people, as they are wont to do. Lots of great lines to choose from here. My faves are definitely, "Unleash the terror, the dwellers of the grave, unholy children of the time. I've seen them steal away the lifeblood from the realm. An iron cross now marks the sign." So another killer track and certainly another favorite of mine from the album. But we're going to take it down a step or two in tempo as we go to the next track. Moving on to track 8, we have Black Witch. Track opens with acoustic guitar playing, accented by electric guitar wails and chimes in the distance. Then Dan joins in with some mellow, clean singing. And it does remind me that other like bands at the time did this kind of quasi-power ballad with heavier parts interspersed thing, such as Armored Saint with Take a Turn, or Obsession with Hatred Unto Death. This track fits in with those mentioned quite well, but maybe a bit creepier at times. Anyways, with a mix of mellower parts with the more grander and heavier mid-pace moments, there's an almost epic feel to the song. It should also be said that the track is 7 minutes long, so maybe take that into account as well. Anyways, verse and chorus don't change drastically, but the latter does have some satisfying changes, and I always dig how Dan puts the stress on the phrase Black Witch in those choruses. Love that. After this, another verse and chorus, then some noodly soloing over top that well-used main riff. Then into the third verse and another chorus, but then a return to the acoustic passage and wailing electric, with a steady beat and wandering bass lines behind it. I gotta say, I do love the melodic revisiting of the opening riff, giving it an almost bookended feel, but that might be deceptive because right after this, the music just shifts into a speedy and almost Motorhead-type chaos, and then just ends quickly. And what might be surprising is how many times Exciter actually played this song live, approximately 72, making it the 11th most played song by the band. And all these times were during the 2020s, so really nice to see this one getting some new attention. Anyways, lyrics for this one are what Mr. Ronnie James Dio might call an evil woman lookout song, so think of the Black Witch as more of a manipulating temptress. And my favorite lyrics of the bunch definitely are dragging me far, circles and stars and the evil of the fight. Black Witch would take me, dragging me down in the black of the night. So one might think this would be a decent album closer since it's on the mellower end of things. But given the album that this is, I much prefer to go out on a speedier and heavier note, which is what we do on the next and final track. As for this one, I actually dig this song quite a bit, though I do wonder how more modern listeners would take to it, maybe without considering the context of similar material from other bands of the time that I mentioned previously. Granted, some might feel like this was the song that should have been chopped from that combo CD instead of Mistress of Evil, and it might have been the better choice, but I'd still rather have it here. In fact, I'd rather have all of these songs here, hence why this is my favorite Exciter album. Moving on to track 9, we've got Cry of the Banshee. Track opens with a brief drum fill, a quick guitar scream, a drum roll, and then straight into the speed metal madness. Verse parts are accompanied by a more driving riff, while choruses utilize more successive power chords, but all the while the drum tempo really never stops its assault. Really love when Dan goes from clean so it almost growl for the chorus line straight from hell. Great moment in the track. A brief guitar solo follows and leads us to the second verse, then to a second pre-chorus, and then followed not by another chorus, but to an extended main riff passage, and then to the bridge lyrics, which is an extremely head-bangable segment. Then on to the seriously intense solo, which goes on for a bit, joined later by Dan's wailing screams throughout, then a few run-throughs of the song title, and then a fade-out of the final chord. Sadly, this track has only been played live by the band around 25 times, so it's pretty low on their consideration list, which is a real shame because this really should be an occasional staple in their set list, even now. Great song. Anyways, favorite lyric from this track is, "When twilight burns across the sky, you better run and hide. The beast will roar from deep inside." And this favorite might also be shared with the band, as this exact lyric can be found on the back cover of the record as a pull quote. So it's a pretty straightforward but also intense and rewarding track to close out the record. As I stated, I would rather go out this strong as it just makes more sense for a speed metal album like this. Good stuff. So unfortunately, I didn't get to see the original tour as that was about 5 months before my very first metal show at 15, but I did see the 40th anniversary tour for the album back in October of 2023. In fact, I shot a concert video special on all the bands on the bill, so definitely check that out when you get the chance. And while I was there, I did pick up a 40th anniversary tour shirt. Got the current lineup of the band there, as well as tour dates on the reverse. 40 years of heavy Metal Maniac. So amazing. And since I got to meet 2 of the 3 original members of Exciter after the show, they were extremely gracious enough to each sign the back cover of my copy of the album. Very cool. And also, I need John Ricci's signature, of course. As for the fan favorite album, you'll likely find that most people will choose one of the first 3 records. According to Exciter vocalist and drummer Dan Beehler, they consider Violence and Force as an extension of Heavy Metal Maniac, and you can hear how well the two go together in terms of tone and songwriting in particular. The band has also mentioned that many of the fans they meet claim either the first or the second album as their personal favorite, so there's that. Also, Dan Beehler considers Heavy Metal Maniac unmatched by the rest of the catalog, so perhaps that constitutes a favorite as well. Still, I should give some love to album number 3, as Long Live the Loud is also pretty incredible. Again, if you've never heard the first 3 Exciter albums, then I'm highly recommending that you do so. As for favorite tracks on Heavy Metal Maniac, of course I have to say Stand Up and Fight, but also Iron Dogs, Rising of the Dead, and Cry of the Banshee. Make sure you at least check out those tracks, but listen to the whole goddamn album too. It's pretty great. Now, of course, this is my favorite Exciter album, but what about yours? Is it this one? Is it another one? You should let me know that, and any other band you'd like me to cover in this series, or even anything else that this video brought to mind in the comments below. And if you're just finding my channel for the very first time, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting, but also classic and modern metal in general. That sounds really cool and you have yet to subscribe to my channel. It'd be really awesome if you did that. Of course, you can also like this video and maybe share it and some of my others with your friends on social media. And of course, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.